Good morning. This is the Blaine's World podcast that can be found a whole bunch of different places. You can find us on Facebook, YouTube, LinkedIn. You can also find us on Spotify. And if you want to find us, you'll be able to do so. I'm your host, Blaine Greenfield, and I'm here in my Zoom studio in lovely downtown Fairview, North Carolina. And each week we focus on news and information about people and organizations in both Western North Carolina and throughout the country. And to that end, it's my pleasure to introduce Dru Dykes, who's with Buncombe County Election Services, and she does a whole bunch of other things as well. And Dru, you can feel free to wave to all you fans and friends who are watching this. Okay, that is Dru Dykes. And Dru is involved in many activities here in the area. I know her as an actor, director, stage manager at Hendersonville Theater and other community theaters, and she's also a dedicated volunteer with the Buncombe County Election Services, helping in many capacities with voting in elections. Her day job is a store manager at Quick Stop in North Asheville. And what I don't see, Dru, I don't see your roller skates on, in terms of getting back and forth to all these different places.
Unfortunately, I've had to retire my roller skates.
Okay, but boy, you're already a pretty busy season. And Dru, the question I typically ask in the beginning is, as a kid, you grew up where?
Lenore, North Carolina.
Okay, and so let's take, I guess, the theater part of what you do first. When you were a kid growing up in Lenore, North Carolina, did you know you wanted to be in theater?
Yes,
Did you really? At what age?
5 or 6.
Really? What
Yeah.
what was your first? Were you in a play then?
It was just, little kindergarten shows. And I loved, the way I could make people laugh and they would pay attention to me and things like that. So I was like, oh, this is great. So I really threw myself into it as much as I could. I was constantly the kid where the theater teacher is like, hey, let's get Dru to do this because she will, and then in high school, I really threw in to theater. I actually earned my theater letter a year prior than normal. So I actually got to wear my letter the whole senior year because usually you get your letter at the end of your senior year. So I
Do you
got it at the end of my
do you remember
junior.
even before high school, junior high, or even as a kid? Do you remember the very first play you were ever in, or one of them?
I don't. I
What
know.
what's the first thing you remember being in?
Shows at Whitnall Elementary, just little stuff. Fourth grade, we did do a educational show about North Carolina and facts about North Carolina because we were learning about North Carolina, obviously, and how North Carolina got the nickname Tar Heels, um, how many volunteers for the Civil War and things like that. So I also had to square dance
In that same show?
in the same show. Yes.
Well, I asked Dru for a reason, and I have this great fundraising idea, which I mentioned to some of the people at Hendersonville Theater or anybody else. I'd love to see everybody do their very first role, like you said in fourth grade. I assume they don't have videotape of that somewhere, did they?
They do not, thank God.
Well, you say that, but wouldn't that be cool? That you come on and you have to do. You don't have to do the whole role, maybe just 5 minutes of it. But wouldn't that be a fun thing to put together?
It would, but
You've gone past there.
yeah,
Okay. So then, in high school, did you continue acting?
absolutely.
Yeah. What was your favorite role? Do you remember?
I was Fern in Charlotte's Web.
Okay.
I got to work with some of the best people in the high school. My theater teacher, Julie Marshbanks, she was amazing. Um, and I was really sad to see her go. But yeah, it was amazing.
Are you still in touch with her?
No, unfortunately not.
Or if we could dig her up on Facebook or whatnot, and we'll send her a copy of this clip, that we mentioned that we gave a shout out to. That's so cool you did that. So you continued acting in high school. Did the bug keep with you? Did you stay active in theater after that?
Yes. I did go to Mars Hill when it was a college, not a
Right, I remember,
university.
sure.
And I worked with Neil St. Clair, DeWitt Tipton, Bill Gregg.
Sure.
I
Okay.
worked with all them. Chelsea Gaddy is
Sure.
now in that, part of that theater. Um, so, I mean, basically, I did theater through college and things like that. So, oh
Were
yeah,
you were you in productions at SART?
Not at SART, no, because I had a daughter who was under 5.
Okay.
So
But
being able to do that was quite difficult.
but yeah, as you were saying the names, and I'm friendly with all of them. They did great work, and
Oh
yeah,
yeah.
that's so funny. I'll have to tell them that you were talking about them and see if they were listening. So you went to Mars Hill when it was
Mhm.
college. You eventually left Mars Hill. How do you continue in theater?
I did go to AB Tech, um, and eventually got my associate in arts.
Okay.
Um, and I just started working around theaters in Asheville and Hendersonville. So I've been able to stay within the community.
And it's pretty cool because most of the work you do then is, I guess, as a volunteer in terms of some of the work you've done at some local theaters. I know in particular you've been very active with Hendersonville Theater. And
Yes.
you were telling me off the air, I know you're going to be starting soon, or if not already into the Christmas show, you're going to be doing what?
Yeah, we start rehearsals Monday.
Oh, do you really? Okay. Very cool. And that's, you're going to be what, stage manager in that?
I am, yes.
Okay. And I never knew it until I was at very small parts in a couple of local productions. But boy, stage manager, you have a lot to do. You know,
Yes.
how do you become, what got you into becoming a stage manager?
While I do enjoy being able to perform and things like that, um, a lot of people don't realize what goes on behind the scenes to make the show run. So I just showed a good aptitude for being able to organize, to keep things in control, keep things going. So I've just kind of carved myself a niche of doing that. Um, but every once in a while, I just get the acting bug and I'm like, oh no, I have to try out for this show. And I've tried out for shows and not gotten it. But then I'm like, hey, if you need backstage help, I'm more than happy to step in. So
Well, you raised such a good point, and folks don't realize it, that when they see a show, they'll maybe see a weekend production, not realizing the show has been going on or in rehearsals. You said October for a Christmas show, two
yeah,
months, and they don't realize, the importance of the stage manager. I'll kind of ask you in 25 words or less, don't worry about the count, but what does stage manager do?
they keep on track for the rehearsals, help coordinate rehearsals, make sure people are learning their lines, helping with backstage moving sets and things like that, and then lights and sound, making sure that they go off on the right cues, and definitely become like the right hand person of the director.
Well, it's like, as I see it too, it's almost like everything. You name it, you're
Mhm.
going to be involved in the production somehow. And
Right.
then I've even seen when the director's not there, you have to step in or help out or just do a little bit of everything. So that certainly keeps you busy when you're a stage manager.
It does, yeah.
So you're doing it for the upcoming Christmas show. It's going to be at Hendersonville Theater. What other shows have been stage manager for?
I was just a stage manager for a tuna, not tuna Christmas, the 4th of July tuna
Oh, okay.
show.
Yeah, the one they just had?
Yeah, the one they just had. I did Sister Amnesia's Country Western Nonsense
Okay.
Jamboree.
That was
So
a
I've
fun
done
one.
those this year. Yeah,
And the shame with the Tuna Brothers one, I was all set to get out there, and then it got canceled, because of
got
COVID.
canceled.
But
Yeah,
what a shame. But yeah, those were certainly very ambitious plays. With a lot of activity in that too. So when you're not doing work in theater, and that's kind of which is cool. Most of that's just volunteer basis.
right.
Um, I understand too. You also, I'll say, in your spare time, and I wonder how much spare time you have. Not a lot. In your spare time, you're also involved with was the Buncombe County Election Services,
Yeah.
and talk a little bit about that because that's talk about another thankless task. It seems if you have a thankless task, they ask Drew. Or Drew gets involved. How do you get involved in election services?
Well, in my freshman year of high school, I took a required class, which is U.S. Civics. I don't think it's required now,
What a shame
but
too, isn't it?
it really is. Uh, my teacher, Brian Barnes, really like made such an impact, that when he talked about voting and how elections are done and things like that, I can't wait to do that.
Oh, is
It
that cool?
sounds so amazing. I can actually help choose, you know, people that are going to work in our government. So I'm helping out the United States.
When, when was
So
the when was the first time you got involved in an election? Do you remember?
probably 2011.
Okay.
Um, so I mean, basically, I became a poll worker. There are three positions. There's the assistant, and basically, they're there to help support the party judges and the chief judge, and basically they help rotate the stations, find people in, get them their correct ballot, um, help people in the voting booth if they don't have a pen, or they need a new ballot. But then the party judges, there's always going to be one from each party. Uh, so they help kind of assist the chief judge if there is a problem, and things need to be reviewed. Um, they would bring it to the chief judge, and the chief judge make sure that everyone stays impartial, that the elections are being fair and run correctly. So I've been an assistant, I've been a party judge, and I've been a chief judge. So I've done all the positions.
Is Brian still at that school? Do you know?
I don't know. I don't think so. I think he retired.
Okay, well, let's try to dig him up too, because no, seriously, what a sweet thing you just said, that a teacher can make a difference and open your eyes. What's a shame about what you just said though is the fact that, like you said, it's not even a required course anymore. How can you not teach this stuff?
Exactly.
But
Exactly.
talk to me, and not meaning to put you on the spot, but we'll talk about your position. And you mentioned to me off the air that it's nonpartisan. You're not working for the Republican Party or Democratic Party. Just, I guess, your opinion. I'm asking, how this all become so contentious? You know, people should be able to vote.
Mhm.
Help them, like you said, help them vote. What's happened in the whole process?
I think things in our country are just so enhanced right now, feelings and ideas and things like that. Um, there's a lot of, you know, accusations being thrown from both parties, or things like that, that a lot of times people don't feel heard. So they feel that elections are not being done fairly. Um, I think that honestly, if people had to volunteer at least one election to see how it's run,
Right.
that they would see, the rules and the laws that are in place, to make sure that elections are fair. And I know with the people I've worked with and myself that we are impartial. We follow the law. If we have issues, we can call election services on the day and tell them the problem we're having, and they can look up the law to make sure we follow it.
Does that ever happen? Did you somehow have to call up to find out the
Yeah,
laws? Really?
I have. Yeah.
Because here's another thing that I don't know if I'm concerned about, but it's out there that in terms of upcoming election or whatever, they want election integrity, and that's fine. I get that. But then to prove, your candidate prove they're eligible to vote, there's also talk about, they're going to require signatures, right? Or that's been out there. But
Mhm.
here's the question. Let me ask you, Drew, that my signature was always terrible, and now it's 10 times worse, than it used to be. So you can't compare my signature from 10 years ago, let alone 1 year ago. Is that going to be
Yeah.
a problem?
Well, we've always collected signatures.
Right,
Um, Obviously, you're going to have markers
right,
that are never going to change over time. That's why they have handwriting analysis
right, right,
expert, because they do know there are certain things that are never going to change. My grandparents, their signatures have changed since they've gotten older because
right,
it's
sure.
harder to hold a pen or something,
Right.
but they still have those markers. So they can compare that and say, oh yeah, this is definitely the same. I mean, if it comes down to that, I'm sure they can prove it.
Boy, I hope I don't come where you're an election worker because you have trouble with my signature. I don't know if it's an age thing, but it's really gotten 27 times worse. But people now are, I guess, questioning everything. In terms
Mhm.
of people balloting. And what's a shame about it, and I'll ask you to talk about it, is the fact that maybe even when you started in 2011 or whenever you started, it used to be kind of one of the great jobs of all time. Like I loved how you talked about it. You're helping people, they can have their voices heard, and all of a sudden, I'll even ask lately or the last couple of years times, have you had any flack at voting, or has it gotten contentious at all where you've been?
Absolutely.
What a shame. Why so?
Again, I think it's down to, people are being told that elections are not being treated fair, that they're, um, not run correctly. The laws are not being followed, which I think is a very
Oh
dangerous
yeah,
precedent to
yeah.
set because it keeps people from voting. Because the way they see it is, well, why should I vote if it's predetermined?
Well, it's even scary. I was just reading, I think yesterday, that certain politicians, I won't mention any names, but they're talking that the 2024 elections are not going to be run correctly, or they're not going to be valid. How can you say that if you're a candidate, and hoping people vote for you, but you're so spot on, I think, what you're saying, because that's almost discouraging people to say if the candidate, somebody's running, saying elections are crooked or they're not valid or you can't trust the results, then what can you trust? Or why would anybody bother voting, I guess? Do you think voting turnout is going to be lower than it has in the past?
I think it's not going to be because the 2020 presidential election, there was a huge
Yeah,
turnout.
that's true too. Right.
Um, but I think, people who like teenagers getting ready to vote, I think that discourages them a lot. Hearing their parents or teachers or pastors or, anyone in a capacity to influence, I think it's, again, a very dangerous precedent to send that message. Um, there are laws in every state that prohibit, elections from not being fair. I know myself, I work hard to make sure that, fairness wins out. And I don't think people realize how hard it is to cheat an election. I mean, it's really difficult. There are, procedures to make sure that it's fair. Each state has its own election laws, but there are standardized laws from the federal government that each state has to follow. Um, so really, I do think it's contentious, and it's going to be contentious um, because of the willy-nilly attitude of just saying whatever happens is going to be unfair,
Yeah,
no
well,
matter what.
that's and exactly, and for one party to be saying that a month ahead of the election, it seems horrendous. But even worse, Drew, they're saying it 2 years before a presidential election.
Yeah.
And that's I think that's a terrible example was setting for people. But back to Buncombe County, let's talk also because you have to teach me a little bit now. So Buncombe County, you can vote early, right?
Yes.
And it's a great procedure. What if somebody wants to vote early in Buncombe County? What do they have to do?
Well, it starts October 20th and runs till November 5th.
Okay,
You can vote at any time until, the once the polls open till the time the polls close. You can vote at any time during the day. Uh, you can go to any
I was
polling
going to ask you that.
location
Right.
that's for early voting.
So it doesn't have to be your assigned district. It can be anywhere in Buncombe County.
Anywhere in Buncombe County.
Okay. And how do you find that information?
You can go to buncombecounty.org
Okay.
and click on election services, and it'll give you all the early voting site, and you can go to the closest one to you. The best thing about early voting is you do have a lot longer time to vote. Also, if you're not registered to vote, you can register to vote that day and vote.
Okay, which is a tremendous advantage. And so when you uh, go early voting, any location you have whatever the hours are, and very convenient. It was, Buncombe County was so easy. Talk about that versus then mail-in balloting. It's who
Um,
can do mail-in voting?
Anyone can request a mail-in ballot. But unfortunately, I think the time has passed
Oh,
to request a mail-in
or
ballot.
it's coming to certainly, yeah. And
Yeah.
so, is it better to do mail-in balloting or walk-in voting, or it doesn't matter?
Um, I've never done the mail-in ballot, so
Okay,
I don't have a preference. I have early voted because if I know I'm not going to actually be working in my specific precinct, I do go early vote so I know I can vote. And I'm lucky enough where I work, there is an early voting site right down the road. So, I mean, I can go after work and get it done and know that it's done. And
I'll
with
just
mail-in voting, I just don't have the same information.
your personal opinion. That's all I'm asking here. In terms of feeling early voting or voting on the day of election, how do you? Some people say, for example, that you should only have voting on election day. And
Mhm.
that's when I was a kid. I don't know when you first voted, but that's all I could do. I remember the one, Drew, I remember I voted in the Bush-Gore election, had to wait 3.5 hours in line. In Pennsylvania, there was no early voting. 3.5 hours in line to vote. Early voting, you don't have to. I've never
Right.
waited. But what's the argument? I don't quite understand the argument why some people say you should only have voting on election day. What's that argument?
I think they feel it has a bigger chance of, failure rate. Um, if you only vote on the day of election, you can stand in really long lines, but you know, there's only those ballots to deal with
Right.
that day.
Good point.
With early voting, um, those ballots go every day to the election services warehouse. So I think people are worried that there can be election tampering. But again, everyone at the election services really believe in what they're doing and really follow the law. So there's this weighing the options, I guess. My first time I voted was the Bush Gore.
Oh, was it also?
It was.
Now,
And
did you have early voting then, or did you also have to be there?
nope, you had to be
Oh,
there.
me too. Yeah, and I was so
Yeah,
glad when they passed that because it made it easy to vote.
exactly. And
Yeah,
that's the way it should be. Voting should be easy and
right.
accessible, period. And if it's easier for people to be able to vote early, I don't feel that that's a bad thing.
Well, I think it's a good thing you're trying to back to your teacher. You're trying to get more people to vote, but with the early voting versus in-person voting, yeah, it's a shame in North Carolina. If you want to require the day of voting, also they should it should be no work. Everything should be closed. You should have a day off. And I tell people, can you imagine, Drew, that if you work 9 to 5 and then have to try to get to vote, have to wait 3.5, 4 hours, whatever. Answer this question too, or teach me about this. In North Carolina, when people vote early, are their ballots counted early, or are they counted just the day of election? Do
The
you know
same
that?
day as the regular election.
Yeah. So something about that, I guess, doesn't make complete sense because you're trying to get the rolls in. But if you have like what was last time around, it was 1/3 of all people voted early, or maybe even higher, and
Hmm.
so you could have processed that, so much earlier. But I know North Carolina or some other states, I don't know, North Carolina, there's a delay in getting the results. Because of that reason, you have to count them all that day.
Yes.
Yeah. So it'd be cool if you could at least vote early and not wait. If they were tabulated, it would make the job a lot easier. But that day itself, election day. So talk about what happens election day. What time do you come in that day?
If I'm chief judge,
Right.
I get there at 5:30 a.m.
Yeah.
Polls open at 6:30. So I get there as early as possible to make sure everything is ready to go. As soon as that first person is in line, that at 6:30 I can scream polls open.
And how late? So the polls close at whatever time. Time they close?
7:30.
7:30. And how late? Like last election, how late were you there till?
The primary election this year, I was there till 9ish, and
Yeah.
then you still have to go to the election services warehouse. So I didn't get home till about 11:30, 12.
I mean, that's some day, though. In a
Mhm.
presidential election, it'll be 10 times worse, I guess. But when you think about it, that's also a factor that you want to ensure accuracy, you want to ensure whatever. If somebody's working from 5:30 to 9:30, that's a long day.
It is.
The Talk about also back to election day. So if people want to vote early, they just check it out, and they can't. But mail balloting, they had to pre-register.
Hmm.
Early voting, you don't have to pre-register, like you said, even if you're not registered. What do you have to do when you come in to vote? If you're not registered, you're new to North Carolina or whatever, what do you have to bring to prove that you're a legal resident?
Um, you do have to bring in a piece of mail, uh, or a social security card, something that shows you live where you live, and something that someone can't get a hold of and say, "Oh, I'm so and so," things like that.
What
So
if you
yeah.
just moved?
If you just moved,
Yeah.
you should have already gotten a license. You have to get it within 30 days.
Yeah.
Um, However, you can bring in something that shows, if you're an apartment and you're leasing, you're going to show that
Good
lease
point.
and say,
Yeah.
hey, I moved here within X amount of days. Um,
And
so I mean,
I guess that's where some of the challenges come in, though, where people say they're eligible to vote and somebody says they're not, and it's up to. It's interesting. You mentioned you've been at what you call a chief judge.
mhm.
So talk a little bit about the positions then. If somebody wants to get involved, like you did, with Buncombe County elections or any elections, what's the procedure for getting involved? How do they do that?
They can call Buncombe County Election Services. They can go on the website, I believe, and find the email address to email, hey, I'd like to get involved, that sort of thing. You do have to be registered to vote. You do not have to be a specific party. You can be unaffiliated, you can be Green Party, you can be Libertarian. Um, so, I mean, you just have to at least be registered um, to get involved. But it honestly doesn't matter what party you are. It does matter when it comes down to party judges and chief judges. There's always going to be a Democratic judge and a Republican judge. Or if one of those judges are not available, you can put in an unaffiliated judge. They just can't be the judges. The judges can't be of the same party. There has to be two different party judges. Now, the chief judge is always going to be the party of the current governor. So if there's an unaffiliated governor, if there's no unaffiliated person that wants to be chief judge, it can be plugged in to either one or any other party.
Now, you've
Um,
been a chief judge?
I have, yes.
Oh, that's very cool. Which
Mhm.
election was that?
For the last 7 or 8.
Oh, yeah? Do you enjoy that?
I do, yeah.
Okay. So it's more, though, you said election day, but does it involve work before then and afterwards also?
Well, you do have to have 3 hours of training before every election, regardless if you've worked
Good.
before or not. That is a law required in North Carolina. Um, and usually the day before we go in to set up the precinct, the chief judge holds on to the ballots and doesn't let them out of their sight. And then the morning of, checking and making sure everything's set up, ready to roll. And then after the polls close, after the last person has voted, you start breaking down uh, the Franklin, voting booth and things like that. So there is time before and time after. But the chief judge is the one that takes everything to the election services warehouse. However, um, the opposite party judge will follow the chief judge to the election services warehouse. So there's no veering off and things like that.
If folks want to get smarter about elections in general, in other words, forgetting media, forgetting anything else, within Buncombe County, is there a way to get smarter or go to the website and what will they find?
You can definitely go to the website. There is a frequently asked questions. Um, if you need to speak with someone, you can always call election services, and there are many people there that will be more than happy to help you. I've actually worked in the front office um, as a recruiting assistant to kind of help Karen uh, find people to work. That's practically a full-time job in itself. So, I mean, there are many people. You can go to the election services, you can call election services, you can go to the website. If you need more information, there are people out there that are more than willing to help you get it.
And you mentioned in terms of volunteering, talk about that process. So if somebody's watching the show, and I've always kind of thought about it, how does somebody become an election worker?
Well, they do contact election
Right.
services in some way. They can show up, they can email, they can, call. Um, and they'll put your name on the list and they go through the list for every election and they contact you and see if you're still willing.
Are people needed?
Absolutely. Always. Every single election, we're always shorthanded.
Really? Because I read,
Mhm.
especially, again, what happened after the last election, some people are not coming forward to, want to work or they don't want to be. I mean, it, it's hard to believe that people are subject to abuse, but,
Mhm.
for doing a thankless task, for doing a civic duty, people should just be grateful for you. Um, but I guess also, the last election were really strange because of COVID. I don't know if it's going to make things better or worse this time around, but it's something we'll see soon enough. Um,
Mhm.
to wrap up, let's talk a little bit about then the two things we talked about. So in terms of theater, you want to see some good local theater, Hendersonville Theater, you won't go wrong. Best bet to find out about that is go to the website. It's what, hendersonvilletheater.org, is it?
.org.
Okay,
Yep.
and we should say it's Hendersonville Theater. Is that spelled correctly? It's R-E, I think. I always, Theatre, I think it is.
Yes.
Yeah, okay. You see it different ways. So hendersonvilletheater.org. Again,
It's spelled
it
correctly.
is.
Absolutely.
I agree. But I think, Drew, the recommendation there is that people, they're always looking for volunteers, a whole bunch of capacities. And I see some really good local theater supported. And lastly, the thing that is amazing, Drew, that the work you do for election services, Again, best way people want to get involved in that is to do what?
Call, email, or show up in person.
Okay, Buncombe County Election Services. And I
Mhm.
guess I'll ask you to make a final pitch remembering you're a high school teacher, but also, if you want to make a difference, I guess you encourage people to come out and vote. That would be
Always.
the key thing. And Drew, I'd like to thank you for being my guest on this edition of Blaine's World podcast. I'd like to also thank my producer, Cappy Tassetti. I look forward to having you join me whenever we're next on, and we'll see you soon. Thanks, Drew.
Thanks for having me.
Okay, just let me stay with me a second here.